There are moments when the kindest hearts become haunted. When those who have carried the weight of others' pain for too long begin to tremble, not from weakness, but from a pressure that builds in silence. Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." What he meant was not metaphor. He was describing a psychological metamorphosis so profound that few ever survive it unchanged: the descent into the shadow. Empaths, those strange mirrors of the collective unconscious, are born with a curse disguised as compassion. They see too much, feel too much, love too much. They read the emotional temperature of a room before a single word is spoken. They bleed in places where others merely bruise. But there comes a day when the empath's light begins to flicker. Not because it fades, but because it starts to notice the darkness within it. The descent begins the moment the empath realizes that love alone cannot save those who feed on it. This is the story of that descent. And how, in falling into their own shadows, empaths are reborn, not as victims, but as forces of nature. The soft-bodied guardians. Jung observed that certain individuals seemed almost porous to emotion. They absorbed psychic energy from everyone around them, the joy, the grief, the shame, the guilt. To others they appeared kind, gentle, selfless. But Jung saw something else, a silent accumulation of unspoken truths. He described them as the living filters of the collective psyche. In them, the world found a place to pour its pain. They became therapists without degrees, healers without boundaries, and confessors without the privilege of forgetting. Yet behind their soft eyes lay exhaustion, an ancient kind of fatigue born from carrying what was never theirs. Empaths, Jung noted, possess an almost magnetic pull for broken souls. They attract the wounded because they promise safety. They promise understanding. They promise home. But every home that welcomes darkness without balance eventually becomes haunted. And every empath, no matter how luminous, eventually discovers the shadow of their compassion, the slow erosion of the self. The psychology of absorption. Jung believed the unconscious seeks equilibrium. When one person overflows with darkness, another absorbs the excess light. When one represses guilt, another unconsciously carries it. In every family, in every system, an empath emerges as the psychic absorber, balancing what others refuse to feel. They do not mean to. It happens automatically. The body tightens, the heart opens, and the psyche downloads another's suffering as its own. Jung called this participation mystique, a merging of identities where empathy becomes possession. The empath begins to lose the boundary between self and other. Their emotions become a collage of borrowed energies. And in this confusion, the shadow begins to stir. For the shadow, Jung said, is not merely evil, it is everything the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. For the empath, that includes rage, pride, lust, and power. All that contradicts their self-image as the good one. But what happens when the one who has always saved others must now save themselves? The birth of the shadow self. Jung wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. For most, this shadow remains buried, a faint whisper behind virtue. But for the empath, it grows like a living organism, feeding on every suppressed no, every swallowed truth, every moment they were hurt and said it's fine. From childhood, they learn that safety comes from goodness, that peace is bought with silence, that love means self-erasure. Over time, they begin to equate worth with endurance, how much pain they can carry without complaint. But repression is never passive, it compounds. Jung saw that what we refuse to own does not disappear, it descends. For the empath, the shadow holds everything they denied: anger, strength, power, boundaries. And when the dam breaks, the psyche goes into labor. Strange emotions surface: irritation at those once pitted, impatience with constant demands, the quiet urge to withdraw. They fear they are becoming selfish, when in truth they are meeting the parts they buried to survive. It is not darkness rising, it is power returning. The light they lived by flickers, revealing a deeper radiance that no longer pleads, it commands. Jung called this the integration of the inferior function, the reclamation of what was exiled. The empath begins to see that empathy without limits is not virtue but decay. Love without strength is an open wound. And so, the birth of the shadow self begins, not as corruption, but as correction. The empath's wholeness awakens, and in that awakening they discover that their light was never meant to deny the dark, but to illuminate it. The betrayal catalyst. If repression is the gestation, betrayal is the birth. Every empath meets a moment when their world splits open, a betrayal so deep it exposes every illusion they built around love. It may come through a partner, a parent, a friend, or a belief system. But its essence is always the same, the realization that their kindness was currency in someone else's control. Jung said trauma is a summons to consciousness. Betrayal is the sharpest form. It cuts where identity clings to illusion. For the empath, it is revelation disguised as ruin. They remember every sign they ignored, every dream that warned them, every instinct silenced in the name of compassion. The truth doesn't arrive as surprise, it arrives as recognition. They always knew, but didn't want to know. To see would have meant confronting their own complicity, their refusal to act on what they sensed. When betrayal hits, denial collapses. The nervous system, long conditioned to absorb, suddenly rejects. No more, the body says. Jung called this the psychic break, the unconscious flooding the conscious mind. Memories replay in brutal clarity, connections form that can never be unseen. It's not obsession, it's awakening. Betrayal exposes the wounded healer, the empath who must be pierced by their own medicine before they can wield it rightly. The external betrayal mirrors the internal. Every time they said it's okay when it wasn't, every time they saved others by abandoning themselves. The psyche intervenes, declaring the old pattern dead. The world they built on kindness was never sustainable. It was survival dressed as love. But in the ashes of disillusionment rises a strange calm. Not hatred, but precision. Not collapse, but ignition. Jung wrote that betrayal releases the shadow in its purest form. And when it does, the empath is no longer who they were. Something vast within them has turned its face toward truth, and will never look away again. The snap. There is no sound when it happens, only silence, a sacred stillness, as if the universe itself is holding its breath. Jung called it an antiadromia, when any force, pushed to its limit, turns into its opposite. What was soft becomes hard. What was submissive becomes sovereign. What was light becomes lightning. The empath's breaking point is rarely dramatic. They don't scream or rage, they simply stop. Stop explaining. Stop rescuing. Stop carrying what collapses without them. Stop pretending they don't see. Outwardly, it looks like calm. Inwardly, it's revolution. For the first time, the empath feels the full current of their repressed energy, the voltage of every swallowed no. Jung described this as psychic inversion, the personality's poles flipping, energy once spent appeasing others now fueling sovereignty. The empath who once feared being misunderstood no longer cares. The one who sought love now seeks truth. The one who feared losing people now fears losing themselves. It isn't cruelty, it's calibration. Their emotional depth fuses with clarity, creating what Jung called the transcendent function, the bridge between feeling and knowing. They perceive motives like reflections in glass, sensing deception before it speaks. Those who once manipulated them feel it instantly. The spell is broken. Their silence is no longer submission but sovereignty. Boundaries harden into law. Jung wrote of this transformation with awe and unease. They exhibit an almost supernatural composure. It is not indifference but integration. The light has descended into the dark and returned illuminated. Many mistake this for coldness, but it is neutrality, the balance beyond extremes. The empath no longer oscillates between love and pain. They have found the still point. Jung likened it to rubido, the reddening, the completion of alchemy. For the empath, the philosopher's stone is self-knowledge, unshakable, indestructible, free. With it comes the sacred power of choice, where to give, who to keep, what to forgive. They have not lost their empathy, they have mastered it. It is no longer a reflex, but a conscious force. This is the snap Jung both feared and revered, not the death of the empath, but their resurrection. They rise no longer to please, but to embody truth. Their light and shadow have met, and together they have become whole. Integration, the alchemy of light and dark. In alchemy, Jung found the perfect metaphor for transformation. The goal was never purity, it was wholeness. To integrate the shadow was to unite opposites, light and dark, love and anger, softness and strength, compassion and command. For the empath, integration begins the moment they stop apologizing for their perception. When they understand that boundaries are not cruelty but precision. That love without discernment is not virtue but addiction. The empath learns that compassion without structure dissolves into self-sacrifice. Jung observed that the psyche seeks to reconcile its divisions, and integration is that sacred marriage. The empath, once fragmented between savior and sufferer, now merges into a single, sovereign being. They feel deeply, but selectively. They forgive, but do not forget. They serve, but only from fullness, never depletion. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming whole. And for the empath, it marks the birth of something beyond empathy itself, consciousness that feels, sees, and chooses all at once. The alchemical fire burns away sentimentality, leaving clarity in its place. This is the gold hidden within the shadow, the strength to love without losing oneself. The awakened empath. The integrated empath walks differently. People sense it. Their calm unsettles manipulators. Their silence exposes liars. Their presence demands authenticity without a word. They no longer perform kindness, they embody truth. Jung described this as the state of selective empathy. It is empathy sharpened into intelligence, compassion refined into discernment. They understand that not every cry is innocence, not every pain is sincerity, not every apology is transformation. They see the difference between suffering that seeks healing and suffering that seeks attention. They no longer rush to fix what refuses to change. They have learned that saving others at the cost of the self is not love, it is martyrdom. The awakened empath radiates what Jung called the numinous calm of the self. They no longer identify with the wounded child or the sacrificial archetype. They become the observer, the witness, the bridge between light and shadow. Their empathy no longer bleeds, it illuminates. The ethical threshold. Power is always double-edged. Jung feared the misuse of insight more than ignorance itself. When an empath integrates their shadow, they gain the capacity to influence with precision, to heal or to control. The danger lies not in their awareness, but in their motive. To see the truth of others without compassion becomes cruelty. To use one's perception for advantage becomes corruption. Jung called this the inflation of the self, when the ego mistakes illumination for divinity. The true awakened empath understands that power without humility destroys itself. So they cultivate restraint. They choose silence over exposure, peace over punishment. They wield perception like a surgeon, not a weapon. Their ethics become their armor. They know that real mastery is not the ability to manipulate reality, but to align with it. They do not dominate, they calibrate. They do not seek revenge, they seek equilibrium. In that discipline, they become both healer and guardian of truth. The mirror effect. When Jung reintroduced his integrated patients into society, something remarkable occurred. Manipulative people grew uneasy around them. Authentic people felt safe. Without a word, these individuals altered the emotional chemistry of every room. Jung called this psychic contagion in reverse, their coherence revealing incoherence in others. The awakened empath becomes a mirror that reflects truth. To the genuine, it feels like peace. To the deceitful, it feels like exposure. Their very presence dismantles illusion. They need not argue, explain, or prove. The dishonest unravel themselves in their company. This is the empath's mirror effect, the silent revolution of clarity. It is the ultimate proof of integration, when your energy speaks louder than your defense. The evolutionary step. Jung suspected that what he observed in these empaths was not merely healing, but evolution. The privilege of a lifetime, he wrote, is to become who you truly are. Empaths who integrate their shadow embody that privilege fully. They are not victims, nor saviors, but sovereign participants in the collective psyche. They feel everything yet are mastered by nothing. They become the next stage of emotional intelligence, consciousness that loves with boundaries, forgives with discernment, and perceives without fear. Their transformation is contagious. It forces systems around them to evolve or collapse. They represent what Jung called the birth of the self through opposition. Humanity's next step, he believed, would not be technological but psychological, the integration of empathy and power. The awakened empath is the prototype of that future, love armed with awareness. The descent as initiation. Every empath will face the descent. It does not come gently. It does not ask permission. It comes disguised as loss, betrayal, burnout, or heartbreak. It arrives to dismantle the false self, the one built from people-pleasing and unreciprocated devotion. Jung called this the night sea journey, the necessary voyage through the darkness of one's psyche. To descend is not to be destroyed, it is to be refined. The empath who falls learns to rise differently. They no longer seek safety in pleasing others, but in knowing themselves. They no longer heal through sacrifice, but through sovereignty. The descent reveals what was always true: sensitivity is not fragility, it is power untrained. When shaped by awareness, it becomes indestructible. Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." The empath who descends consciously becomes the bridge between compassion and clarity, love and truth, light and shadow. They return not softer, but stronger. Not colder, but clearer. Not selfless, but whole. The world does not need more wounded empaths, it needs awakened ones. Those who have faced the darkness within and returned carrying fire.